The truth is more important than the facts. Frank Lloyd Wright. He uses statistics as a drunken man uses lampposts for support rather than illumination. Andrew Lang. Often the surest way to convey misinformation is to tell the strict truth. Mark Twain. Whatever is almost true is quite false, and among the most dangerous of errors, because being so near to truth, it is the more likely to lead astray. Henry Ward Beecher. These quotes come from the book Modules for Manhood, which is written by Kenneth Royce. And this is one of those very useful but frustrating types of books, whereas it doesn't read like a smooth novel, but rather jars you awake in the segments and the sections, which makes you think about what we believe to be right and true and good. I bring this up today because the topic, the subject of this return episode, episode 80 of the Redacted Culture Cast, is called Shame on You. Before we get into the meat of the subject, I want to remind you or announce that we are doing a giveaway in conjunction with our pre-order. For those who are watching on YouTube, let's bring it up here fully. This is just an element of the store. If you go on to our shop today, redactedllc.com, you'll notice that the Into Beasts merchandise is no longer available. To those who pre-ordered shirts, we have them in hand. We're packaging them up after I record this. To those who ordered shirts, stay tuned. But if you are interested in getting one of the subdued shirts, which is black on black, or the new inverted ones, white on black, note that as inspired by Finance and Maneuver, every $5 spent on the store that includes an order of one of these shirts each $5 will be counted as one entry towards a giveaway. We're having a conversation with Tour Knives later today because I have a number of their knives. I really like them, and we want to do a giveaway regarding some of their knives because I think having a good one on hand is a fantastic contribution to gun culture. That being the case, like I said, we're doing a pre-order on our shirts, the inverted ones and the subdued ones. They will not be available for at least a while. Perpetuity is up in question, but they are available now for pre-order. We are shipping them out. We'll be ordering them and shipping them out by June. However, there will be a giveaway involved, including one or two or a series of Tour knives. I want to do a conversation on knife placement on the plate carrier or the belt in the future, but that might have to be an Instagram thing. So if you want to follow us on Instagram, it's redacted or at redacted LLC. That's just business. So the title of today is Shame on You. Shame on you. Why would I want to say shame on you, the listener? Well, that's not really the point. If you are in the if many of us are going to be, if we're not already aware, we're going to be made aware rather quickly that there was another bout of violence in Texas over the weekend. And this is becoming, as much as we want to say on a political sense, becomes um, a a regularly occurring experience where some person decides to do something of great evil, and immediately following that, the conversations that go on in the internet.com, as I think is Actual Justice Warrior Sean likes to talk about it. This is where we end up. We end up in this kind of return to accusations of guilt and responsibility. Not too long ago, I did an episode referring to gaslighting gun control, and the thesis of that argument is that the way that we are experiencing the quote unquote gun control argument is to accuse you as the individual, the gun owner, the man, the woman in our society as being somehow morally culpable for the actions of a person who, before they decided to do this evil, you had no consciousness of their existence. There's no responsibility. And how we're being gaslit is that somehow, because of a virtue that you hold, that somebody else broke that virtue, you are now responsible. Think of it this way: a man with no virtues cannot be accused of cannot be convicted his conscience cannot be convicted in any way. A man with no virtues, a man with no values, uh, may be presented in some ways like the anti-hero of our world, a man who's impervious to guilt or a man who's impervious to shame. But in reality, he's a man who has no foundation upon which to stand. A man with no virtues, a man with no values, a man who does not believe in morality, is in some ways kind of the worst person that could exist. A person who the only judgment that he makes for himself is whatever he wants at the moment. Think of it as some sort of philosophical hedonism applied to morality. It really doesn't matter to him what is right or wrong. It really just matters what he wants. But he will go through the complicated and laborsome process of justifying that Malthusian addiction to his own desires. He will go on justifying that, causing him to spiral deeper and deeper into madness. What does this mean in relevance to us, and why did I start with Kenneth Royce? Well, Kenneth Royce is a rather efficacious author that is still alive today, a person who I would still like to meet. But one of the things that I gained from his book, at least the first one of Modules for Manualhood, he's got 3 of them. I recommend picking it up and keeping it on your shelf. For those of us who are men with children, or I don't have children, but for those of us who are men, for those of us who are younger men, for those of us who are older men, it's a book I recommend having on your shelf for a number of reasons. One is it's good to read in sort of a sense of a devotional. You go through, just read a little bit of it every day, read about it, think about it, write about it. Maybe you don't have time to write about it, but it does. He does have a way of writing that is short and to the point. And this is and one example of what I got from it, and why what I want to pass on to you is that he makes this point rather clear. He has a lot of quotes in here too, and that starts with that quote by Frank Lloyd Wright: "The truth is more important than the facts." This is contained in a segment that says truth contains facts, but facts are not necessarily truth. In philosophy, we will talk about the distinction. We talk about the distinction between is and ought. The is ought distinction. It's very famous, comes up all the time. But what is facts is a statement about what exists, what is real. But ought is a statement that is no less about reality, but what things should be. Not what they should be like, as in, well, the color is red, but it should be blue, but rather it's a question about what we understand to be morality. One of the examples that I like to use about the distinction between is and ought most commonly is the distinction between is when we talk about a bridge. So science and the world of science and facts will tell you that a bridge made out of steel will carry more weight than a bridge made out of paper. It'll tell you science will be able to tell you that the tensile strength of steel will support a bridge that crosses the gap, whatever the gap is, whether it's crossing a river or a ravine, and it will carry X amount of weight, whether that weight is distributed over space or whether it is impact or whatever. But science will tell you what the capabilities of the bridge are. But science can't inform you what that bridge should do. Science will tell you, the facts will tell you that if I build a bridge out of steel, I will be able to drive a truck over that bridge. But it's not able to really communicate, science is not really able to communicate what that bridge should or should not do, what that bridge ought do or not do. Should the bridge collapse? Should the bridge not collapse? Should the bridge hold this much weight? Should it not hold this much weight? Or ought it hold this much weight? That is the realm of morality. It is morality that informs us that a bridge's purpose is to carry passengers from one side of a ravine to the other, whether that passengers is people or whether it's cargo. That is something else. Without that ought, there would be no science would not be able to formulate the necessary components required for the development of a bridge. It requires an aim. An aim is what we talk about when we're thinking about morality: ought, aim, direction, pointed. This is also this is consistent with, in many ways, the biblical description of what sin is missing the mark or being short of the aim or aiming at things that are improper. And so when we talk about the is ought distinction, let's talk about the idea of gun violence in the United States, or the application of violence. Violence itself would or exists strongly within the category of is. It is a thing, it is an amoral set of actions, or it is an action in itself. It is the concept, it is by some other form, right? For example, I can say the ballistic capabilities of this firearm produce this outcome when impacting tissue. I can say that this type of knife causes this type of wound. I can say that this type of tactic tends to ambush in this kind of way, but it is some form of, there's something else that determines whether or not I ought to do that. I ought to use this violence. I ought to punch. I ought to choke. I ought to fight. I ought to shoot. I ought to ambush. I ought to set up these kind of issues. And so this distinction when it comes to morality and or facts and truth, or facts and reasoning, is once again on the table when we're talking about firearms ownership in the United States. And this is why I think we are, this is where we are going to, I'm talking to you as the listener, um, trying presenting a series of arguments that you will be able, I want you to, I hope that you will be able to hear, internalize, and consider for yourself. This isn't an argument that I want to give you so that you can argue against somebody else. What I want to do is I want to give you some material, some intellectual um, meat, intellectual red meat of sorts, that allows you to, as you're listening to this and as you're going on about your day, have a little bit of that armor, a little bit of that what do you call it, gravitas, in a sense of way, as we're going to go into what is certainly going to be a very ugly week for gun debates, for sure. I was gone for a week. I'm going to have to tell a story about this. Last week I was gone undergoing a TBI treatment. For those who know, well, you know what we're talking about. But I was away with some colleagues, disconnected from the world, disconnected from the internet, disconnected from social media, and this, for that duration, um, there was some healing that was done. Part of it was just being away from it. But when I came back to hearing on, was it yesterday? I think it was Sunday. Yesterday, there was another mass murder done in Texas. The question, and there was, of course, news and people projecting what their morality is, and now we're once again going to hear about statistics of gun deaths. And it was in Kenneth Royce's book where I think I first came to understand, to some reasonable, when I first came into the understanding that the facts be damned is probably the way that I'm going to approach it. There's no way that you can translate from statistics to morality. That is crossing that is ought divide. No number of statistics will actually argue morality. What they can do, though, is they can be used as a cudgel to imply what my morality is. They can, or what that they can be used as a cudgel to imply a person's sense of morality on their interlocutor, on the person they're talking to. So let me explain. If we were gonna, when we hear about debates in regards to the private ownership of firearms, you will hear a number of statistics thrown out, and then the validity of those statistics challenged over and over and over again. X amount of gun deaths per year in the United States. Of those X amount of gun deaths, Y of them are suicides, and Z of them are gang related, or something like that. You'll hear this statistic over and over and over again. A person will say, "Well, we have 35 or more children die from guns every year than everything else," and then somebody will challenge those statistics, and they will say, "Well, no, the statistics that you're using to come to this conclusion are actually doctored to produce your outcome." And this is exactly the point that we run into when we have an issue in regards to the use of statistics for moral arguments. In a sense, the right to bear arms, or the individual God given right for you to own a firearm and be able to seek after the defense of your own family, doesn't really depend on statistics at all. So while the statistics will be wielded against you like a cudgel, I think that what we need to remember is that we're not here on the side, we're not standing here saying that merely the statistics are enough to engage in the moral argument. What's instead being done is that you are standing there going, I own a gun and I am concerned with the well-being of my family and their safety and their security. I'm taking responsibility for my environment. I'm taking responsibility for my neighborhood just by being present. And as a result, I'm being told that because I have a tool and that tool has been used for evil, that statistic will qualify, that statistic will overrule my moral argument for a thing. And this is where we run into a intellectual problem. No amount of statistics can overcome an ontological argument. You may know that, I may know that, but the person that we're engaging with doesn't. Or worse, knows it but is trying to avoid it. If I'm going to make a moral argument, a rights based argument, that argument, the existence of those rights, is based on those rights being a thing. Those rights being an abstract object, which is very real in this world, that being you being a human, meaning you as a human being have inherent rights to your existence. And those rights involve the right to self-defense and the right to your uh, essentially self-determination. Let's just use that one for now. But instead of you having a right to but your right to self-determination is being challenged by the statistical existence of people using said right to cause malice or harm or even self-harm. And as a result, it's arguing, it might argue on different layers, but what it's trying to argue on the colloquial level, on the social level, is that your rights are less important than the statistical outcomes presented. What this can be, is that this can be very easily described as an ends justifies the means argument. That it would be better for us to be slaves than to be free men with the risk of danger. It is better for us to be slaves and safe than it is for us to be free men and have to engage with the world, engage and be prepared for the world. And I don't mean prepared as in bunkers and food preparation, although that may be appropriate for time and so long and so forth. What I'm recognizing and what I'm trying to highlight here is that the use of statistics, it will be used, the statistics will be used, doctored, manipulated, engineered to try to argue with you an argument that it cannot win. The argument that cannot win is that your rights are void because of some statistic, some set of events that have happened. In fact, that your morality is irrelevant because of the is, that the ought is eradicated by the is. What should be, what the way that we should act is determined by the way that people have acted. Think about that for a minute. There is ways that we can learn from lessons of other people. We can learn from the lessons that other people give us, whether they tell us stories, they give us direct overt quotes and statements, as in like the book from Royce, or we can learn from the errors and failings of other people. But what that doesn't do, and what that doesn't do at all, is it doesn't determine what morality is for you. It doesn't determine what you should do. It doesn't determine what is right. We may try to understand what is right. We might try to understand or come to understand what is right through the actions of others, but it doesn't necessarily determine what is right. The existence of things, does not determine the ought. In fact, they work in reality, they work in tandem. The physical existence of a thing is the context by which the moral imperative of a thing would exist. There has to be the capability of action before we can evaluate the morality of said action. If you can't do it, how can you call it moral? And so this is where the title comes to play. When we exist in this world, when we come to times like this, where a person who you probably don't know, almost statistically certainly don't know, given that there are so many millions of people in this world, and or billions of people in this world and millions of people in this country. When somebody does something like this, whether they decide to go kill Christian children in Nashville or they go decide to shoot people at a mall in Texas, and you are condemned for being affiliated with them, though you had no affiliation whatsoever, and that affiliation is sort of placed on you, labeled on you as such, the correct response that you should give to your accuser is shame on you. So, shame on you for those who are seeking to demonize the human population or the American population. Shame on you for those who are seeking to demonize the American population, period. But shame on you for those who are seeking to demonize those who own firearms by the actions of those who have chosen to do evil. Shame on you for that form of racism or that shame of collective argumentation that seeks to lump everybody into a category so that you can, for the ease of your mental lack of alacrity, it's probably the only way to say it right now. But that's just going to be what it is. We're going to be faced in the next coming days and weeks. We're probably, and as we have been for the last couple months and years, but I'm guessing it will continue to get worse. We as Americans and we as gun culture and we as people in this country are going to be faced with more and more and more accusations. I would expect it to continue to become more and more normal, let's just say, for people who own guns to be accused of being sort of moral accomplices of those who go do great evil. And my response to my thought on this is for us within gun culture, as much as it may be valuable to engage in arguments with people, probably less so on the internet, but as much as we want to be able to engage in arguments and have a strong response, I think it's equally important that we are able to look inside ourselves and consider for ourselves why we believe the things that we believe. I think to some extent, and I think this can be made very clearly, um, I think this can, or not I think, but this can be made very clearly within American culture that the people who are making these accusations lack the moral courage to consider what it is they're saying. And that's a frightening case. There's a story that I can give is that while attending college, um, while I was attending college when the Parkland shooting happened. When the Parkland shooting, the one that made David Hogg famous. Um, and when we were there at the school, the school I was attending, which is a generally conservative Christian college, had a certain segment of its population that probably didn't fit either of those definition or either of those terms, neither Christian nor conservative. Decided to get together and host a conversation about guns. Now, the irony and the humor of this is you had a bunch of 19 to 20-year-old kids who lived generally sheltered lives, despite their arguments against it. Decided that they're going to get together and have a conversation about guns and gun control in America. And it went exactly the way it didn't go exactly. I'm sorry, it didn't go exactly the way that they expected, and it didn't go exactly the way that but it did go a way that it should have, I think, in some sense. And so I decided to attend this event, this debate, this conversation about guns in America, and the debate started with a video, I believe, by Vox, the 7-minute video, which was both factually incorrect and failed on the level of evaluation. It was a morally horrible video. It was this just disingenuous argument from the core with from anyone with a modicum of understanding would have looked at it and go, "Oh, well, that was a lie." But needless to say, that was the icebreaker of it, and then it turned out to be that was the summary of education that most of these students had. And so what quickly became apparent is that no one in the room, with the exception of me and two others, had any understanding of what it meant to own a firearm, what it meant to shoot a gun, what it meant to be shot at, what it meant to shoot at people. Being a military veteran that had that advantage, and then it also had no one knew what it took to own a firearm, and their entirety of their argument was based on this fact, this gerrymandered set of arguments. And that's the kind of person that we're against. It's an illiterate buffoon of a child who thinks that they can tell you what to do in life because their concern for safety is equivalent to making you a slave. So shame on you. If you're a person who, and this is, I think this is the right response. And so and that was the response. Like, shame on you, shame on those children for thinking that their opinion about this matter was worth anything at all. We're seeing that sort of tactic being replicated oftentimes in social media right now. And it's okay to understand that that's exactly what it is. Shame on you, child. You don't know what you're talking about, but you think that you have a position to stand on. The Gen Z TikTokers who are paid by the DNC to act like they're making a genuine argument turned out to very often be illiterate, uneducated, and disingenuous. But what does that have to do with us? What does that have to do with us within gun culture? And that is exactly where I want to retain the remainder of this conversation. In the last 4 minutes, we're going to address the difference between a fact and an evaluation, and why it is important for us to be very clear in our understanding of both. When facts are stated, whether it's in political debates or newscasts or whatever, we must understand that those facts are, in themselves, amoral statements, or should be amoral statements. But the existence of a fact does not correlate to the implication or the imperative of a moral. What I mean by that is, just because a fact exists does not mean that that fact is sufficient material to produce a moral imperative. It does not mean a fact, a certain number of things happening. Let's just say a bridge made out of steel is a bridge made of steel will carry a train across a gap, whereas a bridge made out of paper will not. What that statement, which is a fact, does not include is it does not say that it is good for a bridge to carry a train across a gap. It does not make that. Maybe the existence of it by our context of living will imply that a bridge should not collapse under weight. We have the implication that the purpose of a bridge is to carry the weight, but that is an implied value. It is not. This method of explanation is really good for ferreting out implied moral arguments buried within facts and statistics. If I say that there are 35,000 gun deaths in the United States every year, I am and I'm using this as an argument. I am implying that that number of deaths, whatever, and I'm kind of just pulled that statistic, that number out of my head. It's not to be used as a factual argument. But if I just say that it is a fact, this is just regardless of its correlation to reality right now. This is again an argument, a hypothetical, that there are 35,000 gun deaths in the United States every year, or whatever. By making that statement, I am not, or I might be implying, bearing in an implication that there should be some moral weight to that argument. But in reality, there is none. I've just made a statistic. The next question, so the question should be, were those deaths justified? Was that the correct answer? Was that the incorrect answer? How many of those were justified deaths? How many of those were unjustified deaths? How many of them were tragedies? How many of them were justice being done? And that is a very heavy, that is the meat of the conversation when it comes to guns and gun control in the United States, is that no amount of facts will overcome the imperative of a moral argument. And while the person that you're in a discussion with may not be able to understand that, or maybe overtly refusing to understand that, that is something that you should know yourself. And I wanted to be able to bring that up today. Our return to, or the Redacted Culture Cast return to the conversation, it begins with that. And that is why we stick to the title of Shame on You. When events like this happen, when there's When somebody decides to go do evil in the world, and somebody else uses that evil as a justification to impose slavery upon you and your people, the appropriate response is shame on you. To those, when you see when you go into the internet and you hear people grandstanding about how the people responsible for the shooting in Texas is something like the NRA and the right and Republicans and gun owners, and they're going to accuse you of being some form of moral accomplice to the tragedy and travesty of an individual's actions, the appropriate response is shame on you. Shame on you to those who seek to impose slavery on the United States by attacking the conscience of well intended people. Shame on you to those who are trying to destroy the freedom of the individual in the United States, our right to self defense and the right to self determination. Shame on you for those who imply that by taking up that responsibility of ourselves, we are somehow held responsible for the actions of people we had no connection with. To those who want to say that the solution to danger is slavery, shame on you. To those of us who believe in the right to bear arms, and to those of us who believe in the right to take to be or the responsibilities that we bear by owning firearms, um, have courage. My only thing that I can say to you is steal courage, take hope. That even though there are people who accuse you, they call what you think as good, they say that it is evil. Take courage, because our ability to understand, our ability to choose which is moral is not determined by the will and intentions of our accusers. It's not we are what we understand to be right and true and good is not determined democratically. That you cannot vote out the rights of man in this sense. You can only vote in infringements. So steal courage, but understand that that you will be accused of being an accomplice of an evil that in fact you oppose, probably more strongly than them, ironically enough. And recognize that part of the argument that will be made against you and that continues to be made against you is intended to compromise your sense of conscience, to make you step onto your back foot and go and reflect on your own conscience and how your conscience considers certain things, when your accuser likely has spent years trying to kill their own conscience. And so that is what I mean by shame on you. When a person uses a disingenuous argument, when they engage with you in a way that is disingenuous, it is dishonest, it is lying, the appropriate response is shame on you. It's not, well, let's consider the articulation of this argument. When somebody lies against you, when they accuse you, and they say, we need to take away guns and impose common sense gun reform, you're going to go when many of us will wonder why it is that we're being attacked. And then the answer is you're being attacked. So shame on them. Steal courage. Do what is right and good. Pursue that which is holy. That being the case, this is a shorter introduction or a reintroduction, or this is a shorter return to the Redacted Culture Cast. And I wanted to start this week. I wanted to start this week with this level of an argument. I wanted to start us off with recognizing that our conscience will be attacked against us, people will use the illusion of fact as the implication of morality, and it is important for us to distinguish between what is and what ought be. It is a moral and an ontological argument that you and I have the right to self-defense and the right to self-determination, and never let somebody use some bullshit of facts to try to convince you that your morality is somehow made void by the statistical actions of other people. So no amount of the existence of genocide will justify the existence of slavery. That being the case, just a reminder before we close, I appreciate the time that you give us. I appreciate your time listening with us. This is an episode I hope that you are able to share with other people, that we are able to circle the wagons of our culture and be reminded that sometimes we understand arguments, so that we may present them against other people, and sometimes we understand arguments so that we may be bolstered in our beliefs, that we may an argument is not always a discussion between people. Sometimes an argument is something that we understand, so that as we go forth, we may go forth with a little bit more courage. We may go forth boldly into the future. So, the other reminder then, marketing pitch, is we are doing a pre-order on our inverted shirts, which are black printed on white. And then we are doing a pre-order as well on our subdued set, which is black printed on black. The subdued looks great under night vision. If you got them, this pre-order is going on for at least the next week and a half, and that we need to hit a certain minimum before we can really go through with it. So we're going to keep that pre-order open for a little while, but that pre-order will also include that pre-order will get you automatically entered into a giveaway, including some of Tour's knives. Look out for the announcement of exactly what we're giving away on our Instagram. That being the case, you can head over to redactedllc.com to find that stuff out. That being the case, this has been the Redacted Culture Cast, and we will talk to you later.